Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second forum in our series where we interview candidates in the Travis County Primary Runoff. I'd like to thank the folks who came today, Delia Garza and Lori Iserloh, who are both running for county attorney. And so we're going to give them a minute each to introduce themselves, and then we'll be going back and forth asking them questions with 2 minutes each, and I'll give a thumbs up when there's about 5 seconds left in the question so the candidates could wrap up. And just as a reminder, we're putting on this series to let folks know more about these candidates, to stay informed, and to ask them specific questions that would target Black, Indigenous people of color, queer, trans people of color, just to know more about how their races, how this office would affect these populations. So I will start with Delia Garza. If you don't mind introducing yourself, I'll give you 1 minute and a thumbs up when there's 5 seconds left, and you can start now.
Hi, thank you for providing this opportunity. I'm Delia Garza, currently serve as the Mayor Pro Tem. I'm the first Latina elected to the Austin City Council. Also a big fan of Frida Friday. I can't really count the number of Frida Fridays I've attended, but it's been great to see this space created for artists, for people of color, for our LGBTQI+, IA+ community. I'm running for county attorney because this is an office that has for decades pushed policies that have devastated our Black and Brown communities, and it's time for a change. I have been working on criminal justice reform during my time as a city council member. Quick about my background and career-wise, I was an Austin firefighter involved in local politics, pushed for 10-1 that got us 3 Latinos on the Austin City Council, 3 Latinos and 1 African-American. And then ran for city council. I was an assistant attorney general. I went to law school after my time as an Austin firefighter. I was an assistant attorney general and then ran for city council. I'm in my second term, could run for another, but decided I thought I could make the most difference in this area, and looking forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Delia. Now, Lori.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. It's terrific being here. You all, my name is Lori Iserloh. I'm a candidate to be the next Travis County attorney. I graduated from UT Law School in the early 1990s and became the director of the Lesbian and Gay Rights Lobby of Texas, where I learned to really fight really to street level and then to the legislature for reform. And I'm proud to have been part of those reforms over the years. I've also been a trial attorney for 27 years. I've in state and federal court. And in fact, a case that you all might be familiar with is I was the attorney who defended Travis County's pro-immigration policies back in 2017 when we were attacked by Governor Abbott. And I'm proud to say that his case against the county was thrown out. You all, I want to run for this office because I see what the potential, what it can do. And I have the years of experience and the specific reforms to make it happen. Again, Lori Iserloh, thank you all so much for having me today.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll start off with our first question, and I'll start with you, Lori. First question: resisting arrest and police brutality are closely associated. Oftentimes, victims of police brutality are charged with resisting arrest. What types of policies will you put in place to ensure police brutality associated with these cases are properly handled?
That's a great question. Yes, now keep in mind, the county attorney's office, we are your misdemeanor prosecutors, and we're also over civil trials. So we're not felony prosecutors, but just because misdemeanors they're smaller, it doesn't mean they can't cause you big problems. They can put a cloud on your record. For instance, shoplifting can keep you, a minor shoplifting charge can keep you from getting a great job or housing or immigration status. So what can we do though to intercede for police brutality? Well, we have a great role there. What we can do is every single resisting arrest charge that comes to us, we can review those videos, and we can, if there's evidence that there's been police brutality in that charge, we can report that to the DA's office for prosecution and to the Austin Police Department for discipline. Now we have to do that within 180 days because of some state law rules. That's one great thing we can do. The other great thing we can do is that we can put a prosecutor, an experienced prosecutor, between the police and the door of the jail to push back where there's evidence of bias. And so that's called direct file. I want to end it. And I have toured Houston's system of doing this and really looked at their specific plans that they have. I'd like us to adopt some of those here, where we pick about 5 to 6 crimes that are typical charges where police bias does seep into the system, and make sure that we review those cases thoroughly and reject those charges up front. And I think those two things will help with police brutality. The other thing that we need to do is we need to take some of the mystery out of the misdemeanor. We need to really get out to the community. It's something I have in my 13-point criminal justice reform plan, but we need to be out in the community talking with people and making sure that restorative justice is part of our misdemeanor system. And that's for that reason I've gotten a lot of support, particularly from African-American faith leaders, the Black Austin Democrats, and then NAACP. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. And Leah, same question.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you want to deter any kind of police brutality in any kind of way. And I think a big way to be able to do that is to be the candidate who has stood up to the Austin Police Department and has stood up to the Austin Police Association. I have asked for Chief Brian Manley to resign, especially after seeing the cases that happened during the most recent protests and uprisings. I have pushed back against APA and their frankly bullying tactics in trying to control elected officials, and I signed the pledge that I will not accept their money, because there is way too much of a relationship between prosecutors and police officers. There's got to be more oversight. It's important that we have a leader who's willing to take stances like that, so our police officers know that that's not going to be any kind of behavior that we are going to deal with. The other part of that is, as a city council member, I pushed for there to be public defenders at magistration. And so it allows the opportunity for somebody who has been arrested for something that they may not have, should have been arrested for, the opportunity to have representation. The city of Austin provides magistration services for the county. And as part of that, and looking at the contract and seeing what more protections that the city can provide, included in that is having a defense attorney there for people to be able to. Right now, you do not have a defense attorney at magistration. And in pushing for that reform from the city council's level, I got tremendous pushback from the county. There was a letter sent the day of the city council vote saying, incredibly defensive, saying all the things that we have, they have done to provide these protections. So then what's wrong with one additional protection for people to be able to have their constitutional rights at magistration?
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with you, Delia. Racial inequities are ingrained into the criminal justice system. Please explain your understanding of these racial inequities and how you will address them.
Sure. So I'm going into my 6th year on the Austin City Council, representing Austin's most highly concentrated Latino district. And in those 6 years, I believe that is the most important part of my experience, especially when it comes to this office, because I absolutely understand the intersection of how lack of access to affordable housing, lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to basic services can affect you, and how that is all intertwined when we think about the criminal justice system. We see report after report of the disparities in what side of town you get pulled over on. There's these very telling maps that we are presented with that see, depending on what side of I-35 you are on, you were more likely to get, if you're Black or brown, you're more likely to get pulled over, you're more likely to get arrested, you're more likely to get your car searched, and I believe I already said arrested. And so that is my #1 goal in running for this office, is addressing those disparities, because studies show that Black and brown people don't use drugs, for example, any more than any other race. We just get pulled over for it and searched for it and caught for it. And so things that the county attorney can do is decline prosecution of low level of any, and again, as Lori pointed out, these are misdemeanor levels. So we can decline the prosecution of these kinds of offenses, decline prosecution of crimes that are usually used to target people in poverty. Those are some very simple and fast things we can do. Right now, the county attorney's office is not prosecuting low-level marijuana, but that's because of a loophole that the legislature created in legalizing hemp. It wasn't some bold progressive move that the county attorney decided to do because it was the right thing to do. It was because we don't have the testing equipment for people to determine if it's actually illegal marijuana or not. And so I would decline those kinds of offenses that largely affect communities of color.
Thank you, Delia. Lori, same question.
So here, I think there's several things that we can do to address racial inequity as the Travis County Attorney's Office. The first thing is we really have got to indirect file by the Austin Police. I mean, if you look at the statistics, what's happening is that racial bias is seeping into our misdemeanor system because the police are charging directly in the system without a prosecutor to push back. And I think we can even look at the charges where that is seeping into the system. It's things like criminal trespass, drunken disorderly, prostitution, shoplifting. So these are areas where we need a prosecutor to push back. The second thing we need to do is we need to do a lot more with pre-booking diversion. And in fact, and I will respectfully disagree with Councilmember Garza, the county attorney's office was doing pre-booking diversion. In other words, before booking people in for marijuana, was diverting them to programs before they're fingerprinted and put into jail. And I think that we must absolutely do that now for other substance use as well, because we're dealing with addiction, right? Often we're dealing with addiction or people who really, they don't have a long record. Why are we booking them into the jail? And I've been talking with one of the JPs about broadening that program and doing it for other types of crimes as well. The other thing that we need to be looking at carefully is it's really the percentage of African Americans in the jail. That's about 9% of the population, but really a third of the jail population, and that's got to stop. So where I'm thinking that we need to look at is, yes, racial profiling we need to be aware of, and we need to be aware of why the police are bringing people in. And if we would not charge someone in West Austin for a crime or bring him in the jail, then why are we doing that in East Austin? It's not fair, the tables are turned, and that's where the prosecutors can come in and level that playing field. I have no idea where I am on time, but anyway, sorry.
No, that's good. Thank you, Lori. And Laura, I'll start with you with this next question.
Sure.
Prosecutors have a vital role to play in ensuring that increased federal immigration enforcement does not undermine community trust, public safety, or the fair administration of justice. As courts become gateways to the deportation pipeline, what policies will you implement to protect immigrant communities?
Well, thank you for that question. I was, as I mentioned, one of the attorneys who got out and actually fought and tried to keep SB 4, which was the racist anti-immigrant legislation passed by the legislature, from undermining our Travis County policies to protect people in the jail who did have ICE holes on them. I was successful in some of it, obviously the Republicans won on, but we need to go back and give that another shot, in my view. But here's something that we can do right now with the status of the law as it is right now. Again, we can indirect file by the Austin Police. If we have someone who's being brought in just for harassment based upon their ethnicity or upon their immigration status, we as prosecutors can reject those charges and push back. We absolutely must do it. The second thing that we can do for people who are actually have been brought in, have been arrested, we can push those charges through as quickly as we possibly can so that any Travis County charge is wrapped up before this person continues in the system. The other thing that I have been wondering about, and keep in mind, I have a lot of experience in this area of the law. I do feel that when we are deporting people from this country, the punishment no longer fits the crime. And in my view, that's an argument that we haven't made yet. And I'd be willing to go back and make that argument again on the civil side. My spouse works in Carnes. And what we have seen with immigration deportation is that people are going back really almost to certain death or to being, systemic rape. This is not what you should have for a minor misdemeanor. So I'd be willing to revisit that issue. Our current county attorney, Mr. David Escamilla, who's been the county attorney for 17 years, is aware of every single immigration issue that we have in our misdemeanor system. I would continue that policy, but I would take a far more active role in figuring out how we can keep people from being deported to these terrible circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Delia, same question.
Sure. First and foremost, we have to get ICE out of our jails. We have to do the work up to and including abolishing ICE. They have shown time and time again the lack of compassion, lack of empathy. It has become, painful to watch what ICE is doing to our communities. And I have seen that on the front lines when these deportations started, and representing a largely Hispanic community, and pushing back against Greg Abbott and going on media interviews and saying it was incredibly racist, being at the Capitol the night that SB4 passed, and being there with my family. My husband's an immigrant. He was born in Mexico. I guess a matter of luck that he was born in a system where it was a much more fair system to become a citizen, and we are separating families. Things that can be done in the county attorney's office. I will have an immigration attorney on staff that will look at every single one of those immigration detainers and make sure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted. We will not allow ICE to talk to anybody unless they have followed every single rule. In addition to, I will make sure that people have access to community advocates who want to provide know your rights information to people in our jails. That's incredibly important. And taking immigration status needs to be taken into account in every single case. Every single case, we need to take immigration status into account, because otherwise we are creating incredible harm to families, separating families, and to continue. And I'm glad we have this forum to talk about this race, but it's also an opportunity to encourage people to please even stay involved in these discussions. And when our governor comes up for re-election again, please remember all the awful racist bills that he signed into law.
Thank you, Talia. And I'll start with you with this next question. What will you do to rebuild community trust in a government established like the county attorney's office?
It's going to take time, because as I mentioned in my intro, this office has pushed policies that really have devastated our Black and Brown community. The statistic of that 8% of our population of Travis County is African American, yet make up over 30% of the jail population. There have been some amazing reform candidates elected in other communities, and things they have done is on day one publishing memos that specifically show the bold moves that they are willing to take, like declining charges that largely disproportionately affect people of color, like in any sentencing, making sure you're equating what the sentence would be to what the cost that is, because we seem to have come into these fiscal conservatives versus whatever, and the reality is nobody should like these criminal justice policies right now, because even if you only care about being a fiscal conservative and money, cycling people, mostly Black and Brown, through the criminal justice system, if you only care about money, then you should care about this, because it is an utter failure. Our criminal justice policies are an utter failure, and we are cycling people through the system. But the real call is to the empathetic action part of it. And I have built the relationships with the advocates. I have been working with them from the time we stopped the juvenile curfew at the city level, to decriminalizing homelessness, to talking about a public defender at magistration, to talking about more funds, to have that 24-hour prosecutor. I have built those relationships. So, and I'm grateful to have been endorsed by people like Chaz Moore and Kathy Mitchell of the Austin Justice Coalition. So it will not be hard because I've already built those. Building that trust and that community trust is going to be hard. And I think that's why it's important to have somebody from the outside, somebody that hasn't been part of the system, perpetuating these devastating effects on our communities of color.
Thank you, Delia. Lori, same question.
Well, number one, as a front runner in this race, of course, the Police Association offered me money back in April, and I rejected that money. Why? Because of the Tatum memo, and this is pertaining to Chief Newsom, AC Chief Newsom, and his use of racial epithets. I personally did not feel comfortable with that, and so I rejected that money, right? So that's the first thing. You all need to know that as your lead misdemeanor prosecutor, before any of this we took to the streets and any of this became a situation, I had already made what I thought was a good and moral decision to reject money from the Austin Police Association. Number two, we really, in terms of the Travis County Attorney's Office, David Escamilla, the current county attorney, who's been the county attorney for 17 years now, he has done some reforms. He has done some good things, but much more must be done. And the first thing we need to do is we need to start pushing back and rejecting charges, especially misdemeanor drug charges. Why are we pushing people through that system when we could turn them right at the beginning? Why were we bringing young people into the system where they don't have any access to the specialized courts that are there for them? Why? Because we're letting them into the system. At the gate, we need a gatekeeper to direct them toward a specialized system. You all, I've gotten a lot of support from the African-American community, including the NAACP President Nelson Linder, Black Austin Democrats, Jamar Brown, who's President of Black Austin Democrats, African-American community faith leaders, Hispanic leaders like Gonzalo Barrientos, Margaret Gomez, David Escamilla, Maria Canchola, the Limon family. I have a lot of support in this race. Why? Because I'm really out there in the community finding ways that we can rebuild the trust. Now, I agree with my opponent 100%. Trust is an issue, but we need to start doing a community system of misdemeanor prosecution and restorative justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. And now we're in our second to last question. Start with you, Lori. As current issues raise awareness about the ineffective status quo of the criminal justice system, how will you fight against the status quo and ensure equitable policies for marginalized communities?
Equitable policies for marginalized communities. Well, okay, let me tell you a story, okay? I have a friend who is a middle-class person. Her son was charged with a fake ID, possession of fake ID, couldn't take his professional exam because that's a crime of moral turpitude. She paid an attorney and was able to get his record cleared. I was at an African-American church in East Austin, and a mom told me her son had been charged with a minor misdemeanor as well. She couldn't afford to get his record cleared. So he's sitting at home right now, and he cannot go and get the job that he wants. You all, these misdemeanor crimes, they're small, but they are very serious on your record, especially for someone who's a young person just starting out their life. What I plan to do is have more expunction clinics, opportunities for people to clear their records, and also opportunities to get their records sealed, where we can do those things, you know, for free or for very low cost. That's one thing. The other thing I'm planning on doing is for every single expunction or record clearing case that's in the county attorney's office, rather than just having one person review that and waiting until the very end of the timeline for that, I want to do that up front. Let's make a determination up front. Why should we make a young person wait until the 2 years has expired? If their record's just going to be cleared anyway, that's time when they are sitting not able to pursue their dreams. We have got to do better than that. And I know we can, Travis County. The other thing that I keep stressing is really direct file by the police. It is a big issue. If we're not going to push back, if we're not going to use our prosecutorial discretion right there at the front end, then we're going to have people coming into the system who they're not being served by the criminal justice system. They'd be better off served either not within it or going into some other diversion type program. And I'm happy to talk about that more a bit, but I think I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Delia, same question.
Sure. Well, you know, I know I offer more than just stories of talking to people. I've actually been doing the equity work. I think it was my first budget session. I helped create the equity tool to make sure that we were using equity as a lens in every budget decision. I helped move over 5 million and I think an additional 1.5 for equity health funding into the public health budget. And every budget cycle, I have used my time there to get more money into our public health system. Just recently with COVID, I led the creation of the RISE Fund because I knew that there were families that were not going to be getting a stimulus check and were falling in the cracks. And they were the ones forced out there on the front lines when our governor reopened the state. And they were the ones going to be most affected. And if they got sick, they weren't going to be able to pay their bills. You mentioned the status quo, and even in this forum, At every opportunity, Ms. Iserloh defends the status quo. And every person that she says is backing her are people who have been part of the status quo. So it's not impressive to me to name names that have been part of the status quo, that have been part of the system, that have devastated Black and brown communities in the county. Regardless of what their last name, they have been part of the system. It's gonna take a change. This moment demands huge change, not incremental change, not people defending incremental change. It's gonna take significant reform and reimagining our public safety, reimagining our criminal justice system. And until we admit that what has happened in the past is wrong and we need major change, nothing's gonna happen. And we're gonna continue to see the same outcomes of our people of color, Black and brown communities, LGBTQI being treated differently by the system. And the system is, really working in the way it was designed to work. We need to change that.
Thank you, Delia. And last question for both candidates. Why should you be the county attorney? And I'll start with you, Delia.
Thank you. I am the only candidate in this race with criminal justice reform, recent and relevant criminal justice reform experience. And I think that's what people are looking for right now. I don't think people care about who's been a lawyer the longest. I think people care who's been a leader the longest and a reformer the longest. And every step of the way, even before I went to law school later in life, in my 30s, even before that, I was working on reforms, working on reforming how, as a firefighter, we were not paid well and we did not have good safety protections. And then after that, working to reform our governance at the City Hall. And then after that, working on reforming our budget. And now working on reforming our police department. I think this moment demands somebody who has that kind of leadership experience leading during the crisis. On March 3rd, overwhelmingly, communities of color supported my campaign because they know my work. They know that they need bold and progressive leadership in this moment. And I would be honored to have the support of, obviously, of all communities, but especially communities most affected by our criminal justice system. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Delia. And Lori, same question.
Thank you. So here's a quick story about myself and why I'm the best candidate for this office. Because I've led on reform issues from the ground up, and I have the experience as a lawyer to start those reform on day one. Back in 1992, I was a recent graduate of UT Law, and I was director of the Gay Rights Lobby. Now, these were terrible times for gay people. We were discriminated against, death was rampant, AIDS funding was just inadequate, and gay kids were derided from the pulpit while they died alone from AIDS. That year, the Republican National Convention was in Houston, and we were attacked on horses with tear gas, and we were clubbed, right? As I stood in that mayhem, I asked myself, how do we get from this moment, from the field of battle to real reform? And I'm proud to have taken a significant role in actually developing the coalitions, creating the strategies, and drafting the policies that led to that reform, including DP benefits, hate crimes legislation, and marriage equality. Now again, we're marching in the streets, and those who are meant to protect and serve are trampling upon our rights. We are seeing the effect of 400 years of racism in our criminal justice system and living in a time where almost every problem is apparently addressed with a criminal justice solution. Mental health, addiction, schoolyard disagreements, and poverty, a system where marginalized people can never get ahead. Now, yes, Travis County has made some big changes over the years, but much more must be done. Last fall, long before any of us took to the streets or before my opponent was in the race, I met with activists and people who were actually caught up in the criminal justice system, and I crafted a 13-point criminal justice reform plan for the county attorney's office that has been on my website since last December. Look, I'm a trial lawyer and an activist with 30 years experience, and the county attorney's office is a law office, 240 legal professionals, and a $23 million budget. I'm ready to make those reforms that we need in office on day one, and I have the relevant experience to make it happen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Lori. So that's all for our questions. Thank you so much, Delia. Thank you, Lori, for joining us today. Thank you to all the viewers for watching this video. And Frida Friday wanted to make these videos to just provide y'all with more information to help you when you're at the polls early voting on election day. As a reminder, early voting ends July 10th. Election day is July 14th. Thank you both again so much for your time.
Thank you. Have a nice day, everybody. Go vote.